Hey everyone, welcome to Devlog 4. Before we get into it, if you want to support the game, wishlist Safe Inside on Steam, follow us on Twitter, and join our Discord. It helps us a ton and keeps you updated on playtests and announcements. We have a lot of cool in-depth technical features to show off in this one. It's been a little quiet on our side, we totally understand that, but that's because we've been spending the last year working on important frameworks to build the game the right way. In our earlier devlogs and announcement trailer, the game was in a state where it looked really pretty, but behind the scenes, it was not in a place where it could scale into a real, viable game. So we had to make the difficult decision to completely gut and rebuild several major features and improve our workflows. As we've said before, there are only 2 of us developing Safe Inside, so it's extremely important that we can move fast, but still maintain the quality that we want. A lot of the work this past year has gone into building systems that let us do exactly that. So for anyone who was worried development had stopped, it definitely has not. We have not had any gaps or pauses in development since our first devlog dropped a little over 2 years ago. Huge thanks to everyone who has stuck around this entire time. We really appreciate it and we will not let you down. Our next goal is to get a demo out on Steam for everyone to try, but for now, stick around and we'll show you exactly what we've been working on over the last year. A massive system we've wanted to talk about is something we're calling the Overseer. This is our take on an AI director-style system that the gameplay relies on to help maintain the flow, pacing, and uniqueness of each run. We've touched on this a little bit in earlier devlogs, but now we want to go into more technical detail on how some of it works and why we chose to design it this way. Our levels are linear by design, but they are not so linear that we can consistently spawn enemies directly in front of the player without it feeling obvious. So our solution is a spline-based player flow system. Each level has a spline that is manually placed from the starting safe room all the way to the ending safe room. The Overseer uses this spline to understand where players are in the level and roughly how far they've progressed. This takes inspiration from Left 4 Dead 2's path optimization system, where the game uses a simplified understanding of player progression through the level instead of relying only on raw world space distance. For us, the spline acts as that simplified path through the level, giving the Overseer a much more reliable way to judge forward and backwards progress. The Overseer needs that information to make better decisions about infected spawning and despawning. For example, there could be 4 players all in different rooms and locations across the level. We cannot just calculate each player's direct distance from the safe room because our levels can have multiple floors, rooms, hallways, and routes that would completely throw off the calculations. Instead, the Overseer tracks each player's location relative to the spline. From there, it determines the furthest forward and the furthest back players on the team. Everything between those 2 players is usually taken out of consideration for the new infected spawns because that space is already occupied by the players. Infected can then be spawned at specific distances in front of the furthest forward player, while inactive infected can be despawned at specific distances behind the furthest back player. But you might be asking, why are we constantly spawning and despawning infected? Why not just spawn hundreds of infected into the level during the initial load? And the reality is, that would just be a really poorly optimized approach to this problem. Our goal is to keep no more than around 35 infected active in the level at once. Instead of constantly creating and destroying enemies, we can recycle infected that are no longer relevant, so if an infected is too far behind the players, the Overseer can despawn it, reset it, and reuse it at a later time ahead of the group. It would be wrong for us to say this system will always be 100% perfect, because no system is, but if we can sell the idea that hundreds of infected are moving through the level maybe at least 98% of the time, that's the goal. Eventually, we're going to make the Overseer a lot more dynamic and unpredictable, but for now, this is all we want to show off in this video.
We mentioned earlier that our next big goal is getting a demo ready, and for that demo, we decided we wanted to show off 2 levels so that players can get a good feeling for the variety in Safe Inside. The first map takes place in a state forest, so it has larger, more open areas and is almost entirely outside. The second takes place in an abandoned asylum, which means it has tight hallways, darker interiors, and a much more claustrophobic feel. We think these 2 levels are great examples of what Safe Inside is. They both take place during the same chapter, so they share the same overall atmosphere, but they still play very differently. Both levels are dark, rainy, isolated, and set deep in the middle of nowhere, but they each have their own personality. The forest map comes first canonically, so let's start there. You begin in the parking lot of a state forest. You might think being out in the middle of nowhere means there's not many infected around, but state parks are huge tourist attractions, especially here in New England, so there is no lack of danger. Originally, this level was going to be a much simpler wooded area, but we started taking inspiration from Quechee Gorge in Vermont. That pushed us to make the level more vertically and visually interesting, with cliffs, overlooks, broken paths, and areas where the environment itself becomes part of the danger. The main idea behind this level is that even when you are in a large open area, you are never completely safe. Infected can come sprinting out of the tree line and overwhelm you quickly if you lose focus for even a second. And because you are in a forest, there are not many places to find supplies like extra equipment and medkits. The main path is not always reliable either. Fallen trees, broken stairs, and block paths can force players into tighter sections of the map, so even though the forest is more open overall, there are still moments where the space suddenly closes in and infected begin flooding in from every direction. But the real claustrophobia of this chapter comes from the asylum tucked away deeper in the forest. We really want to sell that abandoned horror atmosphere and make it feel isolated, dirty, and unsettling with the constant tension that around any corner there could be a group of infected waiting for you. A lot of detail went into creating this map. There are the smaller details like the trash on the floor, stains on the walls, and dust particles in the air, and then there were the larger environmental details like the boarded up windows, ivy growing over the buildings, and the collapsed ceilings and floors. Some of those collapses are not just there for decoration either. They also double as spawn points for hordes, so an infected can flood into areas in ways that feel more natural to the environment. We know abandoned asylums can be an overused setting in horror games, but there are so many scattered throughout New England that it fits perfectly into Safe Inside. I personally find these places fascinating, so we even went out to explore and take our own reference photos so we could really capture that feeling more authentically and make sure we weren't just creating another typical scary location. Still, we did not want the level to be just an asylum. Part of the location also functions as a prison, with 2 buildings separated by a courtyard, which is the only outdoor portion of this level. The prison side was heavily inspired by Kilmainham Jail in Ireland. The curved structure, old cage walkways, and large central room make it a really interesting set piece for gameplay. It gives the level a unique feeling while still fitting the same abandoned and isolated atmosphere. Overall, we are aiming for Safe Inside to be a lot more horror focused thematically than other safe room style co-op games, and we think these 2 levels show that off really well. They share the same mood, but they play completely differently, and together they give a great look into the kind of variety we want the full game to have. For a game like Safe Inside, the infected are the most important part of the entire experience. They are such a major piece of the core gameplay that we needed to rework some systems to make sure they look and feel the best they possibly can while still keeping them optimized. In the last devlog, we showed off our old version of infected variation, but we ran into some issues with it. The more clothing pieces, textures, and infected meshes we added, the more we realized that approach was becoming too unoptimized and difficult to manage. This is what led us to Mutable. Mutable is Unreal's character customization system that lets us generate and modify character meshes and materials at runtime. This is perfect because it lets us consolidate all of the randomness and variations of the bodies, clothing, hair, dirt, grime, and blood into one system. The basic idea is that we start with a base body mesh and then build the infected by attaching the different elements to it. Each infected can spawn with a different shirt, pants, shoes, skin variation, hairstyle, or body type depending on what gets selected. The clothing, hair, and skin variations are defined in data tables and then randomly selected when the level loads and assigned to each infected character instance. To add even more variation, the data table also contains different blood and dirt masks that are randomly applied to the mesh. This makes it so any 2 infected never look exactly the same, even if they share some of the same clothing pieces. Originally, we had it so every body part of the infected was randomly selected through Mutable as well. This caused major performance issues when a lot of infected were on the screen at once, and after digging into it, we realized the biggest problem was that each infected had 21 material slots, which heavily increased the number of draw calls the GPU had to process. To fix this, we did a lot of optimization in Character Creator. With 35 infected spawned in at once and 21 material slots each, there were a total of 735 materials just for the infected. We now combine all of the body textures into one joined texture atlas. This creates only 5 materials for each infected and takes our total down from 735 to just 175. The infected are now much more optimized before they even get into Unreal, and it gives an insane performance boost. During this time, we also decided to upgrade from Character Creator 4 to Character Creator 5. CC5 has a ton more options for optimizing and creating the infected. Before, we were able to make skinny infected that looked okay, but it wasn't quite what we were going for. With some of the new tools in CC5, we're able to add much more detail and make the infected have an extremely sickly and gaunt look to them. CC5 is also far more compatible with the default Unreal Engine skeleton, which makes our animations more consistent. Plus, when we upgrade to CC5, we also purchased iClone 8. This removed Blender from our mocap cleanup process completely, since we can now handle that work directly inside iClone. This keeps more of our animation pipeline inside the Reallusion ecosystem, which helps reduce inconsistencies and issues. In the long run, that means we can spend less time fixing broken animation data and more time actually improving the animations themselves. We are still using motion capture for most of our animations, but we recently switched from Move AI to Quick Magic. So far, Quick Magic has given us better results and works more smoothly with the Reallusion tools. Right now, our animation flow is record mocap, clean it up in iClone, and then import it into Unreal. Finally, we want to just quickly touch on the gore, because who doesn't want to see more gore? We continue to add more variations and detail to the existing gore events, as well as add new events altogether, so we wanted to just show off a few of our favorites. If you're interested in how the system works, we go into more detail about it in Devlog 3, so make sure to go check that out.
Over the past few months, we had a number of people try the game for the very first time. This was the first time anyone outside of the dev team had actually played Safe Inside, so it was a really important moment for the project. As developers, it's very easy to get used to how your own game feels. You start to understand all the quirks, controls, and pacing, which can make you play the game in a very unnatural way. A new player, for example, does not have the same understanding, so watching people experience the game for the first time gave us a much clearer idea on what was working and what needed attention. Our pool of playtesters was small and limited to friends of ours, but the range of games they play and the hardware they use was pretty varied. Some of them are into MOBAs, horror games, competitive first-person shooters, milsims, single-player story games, etc., so most of them were not deeply familiar with this exact type of co-op horde shooter. That made them a very interesting group to test with because they came in with a fresh perspective, and it also gave us a realistic idea on how the game performs outside of our own dev machines, especially on PCs that were not built specifically for game dev. We ended up receiving plenty of feedback, but here are some of the more interesting ones. I could sit here and talk about the feedback we received for hours and hours, but instead I want to focus on one really consistent piece of feedback we got from almost everybody: the player controller and the overall game feel. The main takeaway was that the game did not feel as smooth or as responsive as it needed to be. This one hit especially home because I came from a background of competing in FPS esports, specifically Counter-Strike. One of my favorite aspects of any game is the feel and responsiveness of your character. If a game does not feel good to control, I usually have a really hard time enjoying it, no matter how good the rest of the game is. Because of that, I shifted a lot of my focus towards improving the player controller. One of the biggest changes was leaning more heavily into procedural first-person animations for the movement. Things like jumping, crouching, weapon sway, and unequipping are now handled in a way that gives us a more consistent feel across all items in the game. This also helps us iterate much faster. Instead of needing completely custom animation work for every little detail on every item, we can keep a consistent foundation and add new weapons or items more quickly. Although animations like reloading, equipping, shoving, and melee attacks are still completely hand animated in Blender. There's not really one secret feel-good button in the engine. Game feel comes from a wide variety of small responses to the player's input. It's all the little things that make the game feel satisfying, like camera shake, recoil, animations, audio, muzzle flashes, screen effects, and basically how quickly the game reacts to what you're trying to do. But this doesn't stop with just the player controller. It also includes how the infected react to when they get shot, how each weapon impacts the world, how the environment responds to each player's decision, and how much feedback the player gets from every little action they take. All this ties together to determine how good the game feels and how happy it makes your brain, even when the player's just walking through the level. This is one of those areas that will probably never truly be finished. I'd say it's an endless process of testing, adjusting, and improving, but I'm committed to getting Safe Inside to a point where the player controller and game feel are something I'm really proud of. Because let's be real, who wants to play a game that feels clunky? And that's it for Devlog 4. Thanks for sticking around and checking out what we've been working on. Make sure you wishlist Safe Inside on Steam so you can be notified when our demo drops. If you want to be one of the first people to try the Safe Inside early playtests, you can join our Discord and follow our socials. And if you like the devlog, liking the video and subscribing to the channel really helps us out. It's one of the best ways to show us that you're really into the game and you enjoy what we're doing. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.